And I will wager that, it is Tom, I will wager that perhaps rather more of you will be willing to have an opinion about Tom.
Tom sucks.
Thank you. Tom sucks. Anybody want to defend Tom? No? Okay. Does Tom have any redeeming qualities, really? Can we say anything nice about him? We can acknowledge all of the bad things. Can we say anything nice about him? Yeah, it's certainly the money, although Daisy seems to have come from like some money in her background. But Tom came from old money, right? Money where his family has been really, really wealthy for generations. This is kind of the East Egg versus the West Egg difference, right? Tom is old money, right? And so the East and West, by the way, is not accidental. Oh, Mr. Greenstone is here. Perfect. Yes, thank you. So, Mr. Greenstone is less physically imposing than Tom Buchanan, also a much nicer fellow. So I'll read this description and we'll talk about how much we dislike him. Now he was a straw-haired man of 30 with a rather hard mouth and a supercilious manner. Two shining, arrogant eyes had established dominance over his face and gave him the appearance of always leaning aggressively forward. Not even the effeminate swank of his riding clothes could hide the enormous power of that body. He seemed to fill those glistening boots until he strained the top lacing, and you could see a great pack of muscles shifting when his shoulder moved under his thin coat. It was a body capable of enormous leverage, a cruel body. All right, so he has physical advantages in somewhat the same way that Daisy does. So while Daisy is very attractive, Tom is very powerful, physically powerful. So in this way, I would say that he is equal to Daisy in natural advantages. So while we might not think that they should be married to each other, and likely we don't, we can see that Daisy is pretty and shallow, and Tom is strong and cruel. And those kind of seem to be the masculine and feminine half of the same coin. At least that seems to be almost what Fitzgerald is suggesting. That these characters, as much as they don't seem to like each other very much, are almost like male and female equivalents of each other. Tom doesn't work in any way either because he doesn't have to. He was a college football player, and now he's just a rich guy, and they go and live in rich people places. I don't know about you, that's not a life that I have an easy time relating to. I don't think that most of Fitzgerald's audience would have had an easy time relating to that. So rather difficult to relate to Tom, perhaps even more so than it is to relate to Daisy. Daisy, we can kind of feel like she's maybe a little bit simple and a little bit shallow, but at least she's not really cruel. And so, we can feel a little bit bad for her. Tom, on the other hand, I don't think there's a moment where we really feel any sympathy for Tom. Now, he is unliked by almost everyone. And yet Nick tells us that he sensed that Tom in some way approved of Nick and wanted Nick's approval, going back to college. And this is never really explained, and I think the reason for that is that this is an important aspect of Tom's character in as much as it is an important aspect of the story narrative, right? We need Tom to like Nick and to be comfortable around Nick in order for Nick to get Tom's part of the story, right? And so in order for us as readers to get that full story, Tom and Nick have to kind of get along. Does that kind of make sense? So this, I would say, is his liking for Nick is really more of a narrative necessity than it is a reflection of some kind of character or deeper meaning. Now that's just me. Perhaps I should write that down. Now, he likes Nick. He seems to not like many people. Likes Nick perhaps only as a narrative necessity. 1 C, 2 S's. Should we go through all of Tom's flaws? Or, yeah? So what can we say about him? So the fact that his body is described as a cruel body doesn't necessarily describe him as a cruel man, but we have this shining, arrogant eyes. You guys notice the eyes? How many times eyes are mentioned? So eyes are mentioned repeatedly, and probably not by accident. Like one of those recurring symbols, most likely. And in fact, in almost any work of literature, when eyes are mentioned, over time, more than one time, then we should be probably looking for some kind of symbolic significance there. And so usually eyes are one of the most obvious symbols to look for. And so Fitzgerald certainly emphasizes it. We'll talk more about that. I've dedicated a whole slide to Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. Do you guys remember that? A very short passage where he's mentioned. Okay, so I've devoted a whole slide to that because I'm going to suggest that that's much more important than it seems. Okay, so what else about Tom other than that he looks cruel, leans aggressively forward, has arrogant eyes? He seems to be quite into the racist propaganda, right? We don't even have we haven't met anyone non-white in the story yet, at least it hasn't been mentioned. And yet Tom goes out of his way to go on a racist rant. The one thing that I find difficult to reconcile about Tom, and tell me how you guys feel about this, or if you've thought about it. When in chapter 2, when Nick and Tom go to Myrtle's apartment, like everything that went on in that chapter is basically we meet Myrtle, Tom's girlfriend, and she's kind of like a poor woman who wants to act like she's rich but doesn't really know how. Did you kind of get that? It was a little sad. But Tom's like bought this apartment for her. He just buys her whatever she wants. Thinks that her buying the dog was stupid, but whatever, you want the dog, I'll buy you the dog. Right, probably was stupid. But aside from, you know, when she gets in his face and then he breaks her nose, he gives her a lot of stuff. Is that hard to reconcile with his character? What is that? How do we interpret that? This apparent generosity. Does he seem like the sort of guy who's inclined to be generous by nature? Doesn't really seem that way. Using it as a substitute for affection. So he is willing to buy his affection through dresses and parties and things like that. Yeah, that's probably part of it. Robin? So perhaps a bit of conscience kicking in. If he's going to be a bad guy, at least he's doing something nice for somebody. I don't think there are any wrong angles. Sorry to interrupt. I think all angles are fair game here. But sorry, go ahead.
If you have what seems to be endless amounts of wealth, is spending money on someone really generous? If you're not really giving up anything.
Yeah, it's a worthwhile question, and that's kind of the angle that I'm coming at it from. I don't know whether I want to give him any credit for that or not. But the thing is, Gatsby, who we're supposed to like Gatsby, right? Like we think so far, we don't know him very well, but the book is named after him, and it calls him great, right? So we think we're supposed to like him. Now, he's well liked because he throws these big parties, right? He spends money on people, and he is sort of admired for his generosity. So, granted, Tom's generosity is more narrowly focused, but it's still it's generosity that would actually benefit at least one person, whereas Gatsby's isn't benefiting anybody other than giving them a night's entertainment. So I want to feel as though we're not giving Tom a fair shake here, at least in comparison with Gatsby, because there is this aspect. But perhaps that money really is no object for him, and so why should he or Gatsby get any credit for generosity when their money is irrelevant to them?